Hi, my name is Tatiana and my channel is Created by Lady T. And in this channel, I give product reviews on quilting and sewing supplies as well as machines. I give quilting and sewing instructions as well as crochet and crochet alongs. So for today, what I'm going to be talking about is the 3-hour quilt. Now, it's going to take an average sewer about 3 hours, but if you're a beginner, it might take you a little longer. So not too much longer. So this quilt is by June Tailor. It's a kit. It's a quilt by number, and it's a quilt kit. It's just the batting, and what it has is all the lines of where you're going to put your pieces. The instructions come with how to cut your pieces and what size you're going to do and in what number you're going to work in. And then you have to have a backing piece and you have to have a binding. So you have to create some binding. So if you are a beginner quilter and you don't know how to do binding, I have a binding quilt, how to bind a quilt, a few tutorials in the description that you can take a look at, or you can buy pre-made binding in a package at Joann or any place. But the problem with the pre-made binding is that it's not long enough. So it's better that you make your own binding, but if you're really beginner and you don't know how to make binding, I would suggest that you buy it and then you sew the pieces together, and then you'll have a longer piece of binding. So this particular quilt, June Tailor makes several of these quilt as you go. They're really super fast ways to get a big quilt together. And this one is a square and a square quilt that looks like this. So this would be a really great baby quilt, or it could be a really great lap quilt for someone, or it could just be a really great lap quilt for you around the house to keep you warm now that the weather is getting cooler. So it's a really cool quilt to do. It's a lot of fun. You pick your own fabric, which is what I like about it. And on the package, it tells you how many pieces, what size fabric that you need. So when you're buying your quilt kit, you can just look on the package and then you can decide what fabric you want to use, and it tells you what you need. It tells you what you need for the backing, the binding, and all the pieces that you will fill it. So when you open the instructions will show you how to cut your pieces and where to lay them out. So I'm going to show you how to do that today. Okay, so first what I do is I read the instructions, and so the instructions has the measurements for the pieces for the quilt as you go. So what I do is I cut them all out and I number the pieces, and I cut them to the size that the instructions had said, and I just lay them out on my table like this. And then I can just go and pick whichever number I'm working on, because this is a quilt as you go. So this takes about an hour and a half for me with the cutting and the ironing to cut these into shape and then put the numbers on it. I also made the binding it's all ready to go, and the instructions tell you how much binding you should do, the measurements for each of the pieces for the quilt as you go blanket. So it's all out here, and I've got all my pieces all ready to go, and I'll be ready to sew. Okay, and what I've also done is I laid out my piece for my blanket. I have the that backing, and I cut it to the size of the blanket, and I put it on here. I used the 405 spray to keep it together, but I also have some pins just in case. So what I'm going to start doing is start assembling the pieces. So it's 1 and then 2, 3, 4, like so. And so I have all the pieces on my other table, and I just go and I do the stitch and flip method with this until I get the whole piece done. Okay, so I've laid down my first piece, and so that's number 1. And this is where number 2 is going to be. So if you look right here, there's 2. So what I would do is I turn this around like this with the right sides facing each other and line up the triangle here. And then stitch a 1/4 inch down and then flip it over. And then I would do the same on this side. And when I'm finished with the 2 sides, I'm going to do this side and this side. That way they can all overlap each other, and I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so I sewed the 2 sides together, and I sewed it at a 1/4 inch, and I went straight down like so. And I sewed it this way, and then now I'm going to sew it this way, this way. So this was 1, that was 2, that was 3, and this is going to be 4 over here, and that's going to be 5. So it's all in number order, which is really kind of cool. Okay, so here's what it looks like with all the sides sewn. And so I'm just going to keep continuing and going out and out. And when I'm done, I'm going to sew in the ditch so that the quilt, a little bit of the quilting will stay. I might use a zigzag stitch or a decorative stitch. I'll have to think about that right now. But when you do that, you need to start, if you're going to do the decorative stitches here, you're going to have to start in the middle and then go out. So that's really an important thing to note when you're doing quilt as you go. So I'll show you when this whole piece is put together, and then I'll show you before I start sewing in the ditch. Okay, so here's what it looks like with all the sides sewn. And so I'm just going to keep continuing and going out and out. And when I'm done, I'm going to sew in the ditch so that the quilt, a little bit of the quilting will stay. I might use a zigzag stitch or a decorative stitch. I'll have to think about that right now. But when you do that, you need to start, if you're going to do the decorative stitches here, you're going to have to start in the middle and then go out. So that's really an important thing to note when you're doing quilt as you go. So I'll show you when this whole piece is put together, and then I'll show you before I start sewing in the ditch. Okay, so I'm completely done with sewing this whole blanket, and it's completely ready to be binded, except before I bind it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch in the ditch over it. And I think I'm just going to use a simple zigzag stitch, maybe on 3 or 4 on my sewing machine. Okay, so I'm completely done with sewing this whole blanket, and it's completely ready to be binded, except before I bind it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch in the ditch over it. And I think I'm just going to use a simple zigzag stitch, maybe on 3 or 4 on my sewing machine. Okay, so I'm just focusing here to show you that I used a zigzag stitch to stitch in the ditch, and I kind of went outside, if you see here, and I just went through all the lines, and I used that zigzag stitch all the way through. So my project is almost done, except I have to bind it. And when I use the zigzag stitch on my machine, here's the settings. It was 3 and 5.1 for the tension. So it's right here, the settings. So it looked just like this, and it was just perfect. It was just absolutely perfect. It just went really quickly when I did the zigzag. Really looks nice. Okay, so this is the quilt and how it turned out. And this is the front, and I use this Halloween theme. And I'll show you really close how the binding looked. And so this was the square and the square. And because I used all the dark colors, they kind of blended in with each other. And so this is the quilt size. And then here is the backing, which is the piece that I put. So this turned out really great, and it was a really wonderful and fun project to do. So I hope that you get the June Tailor quilt as you go for making a blanket. And I hope you enjoy it and you have a good time doing this project. If you liked this channel, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and please, if you try this or if you've thought about trying it, put it in the comments and let me know. Okay? Bye for now.